Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the presentation on Cap-Exempt H-1Bs. This webinar is being recorded and the recording link will be emailed to all attendees. This webinar is provided as an educational service by Alcorn Immigration Law. The information discussed is an overview only and should not be construed as legal advice or advice to take any specific action. Please be sure to consult a knowledgeable professional with assistance with your particular legal issue. Lastly, please submit any questions you may have by using the Q&A function. The questions do get shared publicly, so please do not share any sensitive or personal information. There is an option to submit your questions anonymously. We will try to get to as many questions as time permits. And it is now my pleasure to introduce to you our founding attorney, Sophie Alcorn.
Hello, thank you so much, Edith, for your kind introduction. Welcome, everybody. Today we are going to be talking all about Cap-Exempt H-1Bs. Very exciting topic and less commonly used. So a lot of creative strategies will be sharing case studies of different types of organizations that have used this that we've seen with our clients, details on how you can use it. And I'll also be sharing, time permitting, just some of the basics as well to ground you and make sure that you have all of the context to understand what we're going to be chatting about today, especially if you are new to immigration and perhaps this is your first time learning about these options. As Edith mentioned, I do really appreciate it when you can use the Q&A panel to type in your questions. I'm happy to try to monitor that as I go and include the answers on the slides that they are related to. So I like doing that where possible, and I will also be saving time at the end for any questions we don't get to, more discussion. So I anticipate that there might be a lot of questions. I welcome them. So we will get started. So this is me. This is when I had shorter, blonder hair before the pandemic. So I guess it's time to get a new headshot. But some of you know me because we've spoken before. I'm a U.S. immigration attorney. I have a column in TechCrunch called Dear Sophie, a podcast called Immigration Law for Tech Startups that you can find on Apple and Google and Spotify and Ghana and Alexa and Facebook and wherever you get your podcasts from. So that comes out every week. And we talk about, these topics and a lot more detail on the podcast. So we welcome you to subscribe and share that with your friends. And that's what I've been up to lately. Also the founder here of Alcorn Immigration Law and daughter of an immigration lawyer, the daughter of my dad was an immigration lawyer and my mom is an immigrant from Germany. So this is very, very near and dear to my heart. And my personal mission is to just help people live their dreams, even whatever they are. If there's one thing I can do to help people, and that is take away physical lines on a map as something that might get in the way between you and what you want to create in the world, then I would consider that a very well-lived life. So that's why I started Alcorn Immigration Law. And our mission to that end is to overcome borders and expand opportunity and connect the world by practicing compassionate, cutting-edge, and rigorous immigration law in service of the betterment of humanity. So whether you are a company or an individual, whether you're in the United States or outside the United States, we have you covered. And our team is growing. There's a talent shortage in tech and in Silicon Valley, and as a result, we're growing. We're adding 6 new roles to the team right now, attorneys and paralegals. Everybody who joins our team is really personally motivated by immigration, either through their own story of their own, personal immigration to the United States, by being married to an immigrant, being the children of immigrants. So we just really love supporting our clients. It's more than a job for all of us. And because of that, it's led to our success. We've been extremely successful with approvals, even in the Trump administration, even COVID, helping we actively right now have a portfolio of about 200 early stage technology companies that we represent for the founders and the teams, and we've helped thousands of people get visas, green cards, and citizenship in the United States in the last 6 years since I founded the firm out of my kitchen in Silicon Valley. We have a wide network that we love leveraging to support our clients. So if you need any introductions or resources, I'm a mentor at 500 startups, and we're also connected to Y Combinator and TechCrunch. So please keep that in mind if we can support you in any way. And okay, so with that, I'm gonna turn now and get us started. And what I want to do first is to provide an overview of immigration in general, to specifically put this Cap-Exempt H-1B thing in context, because immigration law is like this, going off the size of the screen, and H-1Bs are this, and H-1B cap exemptions are like that. So they're very important, but there's also like a whole lot of other context that helps make sense of the whole thing. But bottom line, if you want to know why you're in this webinar, it's to help you understand how you and the organization you are representing, or you as an individual, can basically obtain a working visa for somebody to be employed in the United States with only a bachelor's level of experience, not having to be some sort of genius, for somebody who's going to work as an employee at some US company, where they're not an investor, they're not like some famous startup founder. Basically, how to get a normal person with a bachelor's degree a job at a US company without the randomness of the H-1B annual lottery. That is the point of today. So if there's one thing I can leave you with, it's an explanation of how that all works. You can call it a plan B, or a legal loophole, or a creative strategy, but I'm going to explain how the law works that allows all of this to happen. So let me put that in context. Okay, so most people coming to the US from other countries typically initially come here on some sort of short-term visa. And then if they want to stay longer, then they might seek sponsorship to get a green card through a family member or an employer. And then after somebody has citizenship, or excuse me, permanent residence for a certain number of years, then they can apply for citizenship. Just so you know, it's also possible for somebody born in another country, living in another country, to directly go for a green card and not even get a visa, but this is a multi-year process. So typically, if somebody has some sort of short or medium term urgency to get to the United States, it's important to get a visa first. But sometimes mid-career professionals with children who are high school students with a decent life wherever they're living now might be okay with just waiting for the security of a green card for a few years and then getting to the US before their kids enter college, for example. So it all depends on your personal family situation, your business goals. We have to create individual strategies for each person and their family. Now, there is also a subpath that is most common for professionals who have come to the United States as students, international students. And the most common non-immigrant classification, aka a visa for international students, is an F1. There's also some people who come to study on J1 exchange visas, but that's less common. So this slide describes a typical path for international students on F1, and pre-pandemic, there were about a million international students in the US on F1 at any given time, including, mostly college, masters, and PhDs, but even some high school students. But the work authorization I'm going to be chatting about applies specifically for bachelor's level and higher. So most tech startups we support approach this slide from the following perspective, which is we've identified the student who is about to graduate from a university, and we want to employ them after they graduate. how do we do it? And so we typically tell them, all right, well, if it's, for a summer job, if the school allows it, then you might be able to hire the person on a program called curricular practical training, where they can get paid for a certain duration. So check with the school if the school authorizes it. And if you want to hire the person right when they graduate, that's great. If they're getting a master's or a bachelor's or a PhD, whatever level they're graduating from, they will get a 1-year work permit to work in their field of study, and that is called regular post-completion optional practical training. We typically just refer to that as OPT. Most people get it for a year when they graduate. They can be self-employed, they can volunteer, they can be an employee. As long as it's in their field and they report it to the school and they get a document called an I-20 to show that it's all legit and approved. And then a tech company, if you want to hire the person and keep them working beyond that initial 1 year, if they studied a STEM field, science, technology, engineering, or math, then they qualify for an additional 2-year work permit extension, but the requirements are a little different. So you need to do a training plan, and you need to get your company enrolled in the E-Verify document verification system for I-9 inspections, and you need to use that consistently across your team for new hires when you're enrolled. So that's a way combined for somebody to work for your company for 3 years after they graduate. And then company, if you want to help this person and support their professional development and their life in the US, really what you ought to consider is putting this individual in the H-1B lottery in March of every year, from before they graduate to their first year on OPT to each of their 2 years on STEM OPT. And hopefully one of those times they are going to get picked for an H-1B, and that's lovely, and they can work for you usually 3 years in 3-year chunks up to 6 years, but then you start the green card process for them, and it'll take a really long time if they're from India or China, but you'll have a happy, loyal, safe feeling team member who will want to give their best to your organization. And one day, once they have a green card, then they can apply for citizenship. So that's the most typical immigration pathway for people who come to the US as students, as recruited by corporations, startups, tech startups. That's the most typical path. And just a reminder, 3 different roads up the green card mountain, through employment or investment, through family, and through a lottery for certain countries. All roads lead to permanent residence, whether there's a plateau for getting a 2-year conditional green card on the way through marriage, or EB-5 investment is, a specific route. But essentially, once you have a 10-year green card through any of these categories, you're in, and you stay as long as you don't screw it up, and you can become a citizen if you want. So that's the end goal for many people. A few notes, because some of this has gotten a little bit topsy-turvy over the last 2 years in COVID. So first of all, there are delays. The government has continued to be backlogged. It's a combination of pulling back embassy and consulate staff at the beginning of COVID, who resigned under Trump and hasn't been replaced yet, as well as a budget kind of crisis at USCIS domestically from a lack of applications filed at the beginning of COVID. So it's a real big priority for the administration to get the processing times back on track right now, but it hasn't happened yet. So please be prepared that there are still delays in processing times, work permit issuance, scheduling, visa appointments at various consulates. So it's very important to keep the timeline and those variables in mind as you create your specific strategy. Other recent changes for green cards and citizenship now, sometimes telephonic Interviewing is available. Attorneys can attend by phone, so that's a little bit of a difference. And the government in general is still offering people more time to respond to requests for evidence in the pandemic. Another recent change is what it takes to actually enter the United States. So this is for people who have a visa like an H-1B already, or a visitor visa, or ESTA. The way the government had been handling this from the beginning of COVID to the present is that they had identified countries deemed to be high risk for COVID exposure. And the rule was that if you had been in those locations in the last 14 days, you would not be allowed to directly enter the United States. So that included the Schengen area of Europe, as well as the UK, Ireland, Brazil, India, China, among others. And this led to people either having to go hang out in Mexico and sit on the beach for 2 weeks before coming to California, or getting something called a national interest exception through some government agency, usually at a consulate, often at the time of visa application for an emergency visa, to be able to directly enter the United States. They did make negative COVID test results mandatory within 72 hours for people entering the United States. Or if you had COVID and you were testing positive, but you got a doctor's letter, you could still come in. So the new change, several new changes. So now for green cards, full vaccination is now required as part of the medical exam. For people with medical or religious objections to getting vaccinated, there is a waiver process. Nobody has gotten through it yet. It is unclear how strict or lenient the government will be for that, or what evidence they will require. So that is an emerging field. And the other really big change coming up in 10 days from the day of this webinar is that on November 8th, 2021, we're going to have the end of the 14-day travel ban scheme. We're still waiting for many of the details, but the preliminary regulatory text is saying basically if you're from Europe or India or China, you don't have to show proof of a vaccine to go to a visa interview or get a visa in your passport. But when you come to the United States, you'll have to prove at the airport both that you're fully vaccinated and the negative COVID test. And if you're not fully vaccinated, you have to promise that you're going to get vaccinated within 60 days of being here, or there's exceptions, but all the exceptions are not figured out yet. So if you absolutely have to come directly to the United States on November 8th, you need a visa or ESTA, some way to enter, and you're just going to need to be fully vaccinated until they figure out this exception thing, probably, to be able to have any sort of dependable travel plans. So that's some of the latest COVID immigration updates, constantly changing. So now to zoom in even further from the whole world of immigration law and who goes through it and what the general process is and how it's changed under COVID, now let's take it a step further and zoom in and let's talk about H-1Bs in general. So H-1Bs, normal H-1Bs have to go through a lottery. The lottery is called, in the law, in the regulation, it talks about certain types of H-1Bs being subject to a cap, a numerical annual limit. So that is why we use the word cap related to all of this. It is not somebody wearing a baseball hat. It just refers to the lottery. And basically there's 65,000 H-1Bs available every year for people working at private employers. Plus an additional 20,000 set aside for people who got master's degrees or PhDs in the United States. And for the last several years, we've seen over 200,000 people applying annually for these 85,000 spots. So you have about a 1 in 3 or a 1 in 4 chance of getting selected, depending on whether you got an advanced degree from the United States. So it's very random, it's very unpredictable, it's very hard to navigate, it's very hard to make business plans based on. And there's been a lot of talk about changing the program. Some recent important updates under the last year of the Trump administration, they were threatening to increase the prevailing minimum wage for H-1Bs, but so far that has not happened. And also, there was a regulation that was supposed to take effect next March for the next lottery that would have removed some of the randomness of the lottery and made it based on a prioritization process based on people's wages. But that recently was thrown out by a federal judge. So the lottery is still random for March of 2022. So normal H-1Bs, you get through the lottery, you request up to 3 years initially. You can renew it in 3-year increments. You can recapture time unused of up to a 6-year maximum. To qualify, you need to have a US company. The company has to be funded or have a business plan or some runway or something to show that it has the ability to pay the new employee the prevailing wage. And the employee's prevailing wage is based on their professional job classification, the geography in which they're working, the level at which they're doing their job. And we have to make sure it's a professional job that requires at least a bachelor's degree or equivalent experience. If the candidate doesn't have a bachelor's degree, we can do an experience evaluation. So if somebody went to college for 2 years and dropped out and they've been working for 6 years, 3 years of work experience is equivalent to 1 year of a 4-year bachelor's degree. So we could cobble that together to show that that person has the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree. So that's how normal H-1Bs work. And it's lovely if you're selected. I mean, that's the goal. The issue is that there's, more demand for international talent than the law provides for the supply through this cap mechanism. And therefore, we need to seek alternatives, which is the point of this webinar. So with that, oh yeah, just a few more notes on normal H-1Bs and how that all works. So H-1B transfers, you can't transfer an H-1B unless you're already in an H-1B or you've had an H-1B. So most H-1B transfers happen because somebody's already made it through the lottery. A second company that is hiring the person effectuates the transfer by filing a petition. The prior company that is currently employing the individual is not notified by the government of the transfer request. The new company gets the petition approved, the person gives notice, starts working for the new company, and it's the old company's obligation to notify the government that the person is no longer working for the old company. So that is how transfers typically work. And then extensions in typical H-1B world, as I mentioned, you can recapture time up to 6 years. And then this is most critical for people born in India and China, because we have a racist green card allocation system that disparately affects people who, happen to have the lot in their fate to be born into India and China. That is my personal opinion only. So anyway, there's this other law that tries to help people in that situation who have been affected by those unequal backlogs. And it's called AC-21, American Competitiveness in the 21st Century Act. And essentially, there's 2 ways to get extensions beyond the 6 years. So employers, this is where you have to be careful about sponsoring somebody for a green card soon enough once they go into an H-1B. And basically, the green card process through employment has 3 phases. Step 1 is perm, step 2 is an I-140, and step 3 is typically an adjustment of status, although you could also do it through consular processing. So if you've just started the green card process, that's perm, and typically, and you want to make sure that at least 365 days have elapsed since the perm was filed, or also the I-140 is filed. And if you do that, somebody can get 1-year extensions beyond the 6 years when they renew their H-1B. But if they've already gotten to the end of having an approved I-140 and they're just awaiting their priority date, their turn in line to go to step 3, the adjustment of status process, then that person would qualify for 3-year extensions. So there are many people from India and China in the US who are, for example, software engineers who got their H-1Bs in like 2008 or 2010 or 11, and they already maxed out their 6 years, but they got through certain stages of the green card process, so they can just have unlimited H-1B renewals basically while they're waiting their turn in line for a green card. So, there's like different issues that play out based on the seniority of the people you're hiring for your team. If you're hiring recent grads, the point is getting them through the lottery. If you're hiring more senior level engineers, then the point is helping them make sure they can still maintain their green card status. So always many fun things to explore here. So we did all of immigration law and COVID, H-1Bs. Now let's go into our narrow wedge and explore the world of cap-exempt H-1Bs without the lottery. It's the moment you've all been waiting for. Thank you for your patience in allowing me to lead you to this point. I just want it to make sense now that we're actually here, All right, so cap-exempt H-1Bs. What is this? Okay, cap-exempt, no cap, no lottery. Because there's no lottery required, they are available any time of the year. And why this exists, the way the law is written, and I'll show you some snippets of the regulations in a little bit. Essentially, Congress wanted, when they were making the H-1B laws in the 80s, to have unlimited professional workers to support the military, universities, research, but then they wanted to limit the number of H-1Bs that could be allocated to people in private corporations. My interpretation is those probably job protection measures for US citizens was the probable policy goal at that time. So the way the law is written and the regulations are written, it's that these people get an unlimited number of these H-1Bs and everybody else has to go through the lottery. So if you're a private company, typically you have to hire people going through the lottery. But as we've discussed, that is painful, unpredictable, unclear. You can't make a cohesive strategy around it. There's too much randomness, and your candidates do not have job satisfaction because they're terrified that they might be kicked out of the country after they've spent all this money on their education. So the system really is not working, which is why we need to talk about alternatives. So here is how these alternatives work. Okay, so it's a wonderful, so there's many benefits. This is a fabulous, there's several options. I'll go into case studies, but they can be very helpful to people who were just never selected in the H-1B lottery. So if somebody is on their 3rd and final year of STEM OPT and they've never been selected and their work permit is about to run out, this is a plan B to help keep them in the United States. And another really great thing about these cap-exempt H-1Bs is that you are not stuck on the March lottery, October start date annual application cycle of a normal H-1B. So if you have a candidate who you need to bring to the United States who's in Sri Lanka and needs to come in February to start working immediately, this might be a viable route to consider because you don't have to choose an October start date. And for some candidates, it can also be a really big benefit, like if you are from India or China and you want to get into H-1B to start the green card process sooner, it's a great way to have the security that you can travel internationally while a perm or I-140 is pending for you, because you're already in H-1B status, which is a dual intent status. That means, unlike an F-1 that requires you to not want to stay in the US long term, it is totally okay to have an H-1B and try to go for a green card. So, so here's the example. If somebody is from India, they're just starting out with their regular OPT, company loves them, will do whatever it takes, wants to start a green card process for them, but they need to be able to travel internationally. Maybe their F1 is expiring, they want to go home to see mom and dad. It can be really painful or impossible to get an F1 visa renewed once you're already working, and especially if you have a green card in process. So if you need a guarantee of having an H-1B, going for a Cap-Exempt as opposed to waiting for the lottery can help you start the green card sooner. So there's many benefits. These are just a few. I mean, obviously it depends on your company's needs and your candidate or your personal situation. So who qualifies? A lot is the same compared to a normal H-1B. There are only a few differences, and I'll go into those next, but I just want to highlight some of the basic similarities. The person getting the H-1B, same thing. They need a bachelor's degree or an equivalent education. They can be inside the US, they can be outside the US. And the role, and the company have the same requirements. So you need a company that has the ability to pay the prevailing wage in a specialty occupation. There's a lot of things there, but this isn't going to be for like administrative or unprofessional work. The company needs to have some cash to make payroll. It has to be a legitimate job. Typically a bachelor's level of experience, a bachelor's or equivalent experience needs to be required by this role in the field. So those are all very, very standard requirements for H-1Bs that apply here as well. But now, here's the fundamental difference. It's that certain types of organizations are exempt from going through this annual March lottery. So they include universities, nonprofit organizations affiliated with universities, nonprofit research institutions, and government research institutions. So now you're saying, okay, that's lovely, but my startup was just funded by A16Z and we're not a university. How on earth do I use that? So that is what I will talk about next. And in order to do so, I need to explain another legal concept to you, and this is one about concurrent H-1Bs. And I see questions in the chat, so I would just encourage you to copy and paste that into the question and answer panel so I can make sure to get through all of the questions at the end. Thank you. So here's this other fundamental concept. The law also contemplates that it is okay to have more than one H-1B at a single time to authorize a single beneficiary to work for multiple employers concurrently. There is no limit on the number of H-1Bs that somebody can hold at a single time. But it has to pass a sniff test, right? Like if you have 15 concurrent H-1Bs and each says you're going to work 10 hours a week, the government is probably, the government officer adjudicating these is probably going to scratch his or her head at some point and say, this is impossible. Nobody can work that much. This is weird. This is fraud. I'm not going to approve them. But you could have 2 H-1Bs for 20 hours a week each, for example, or 1 H-1B for 40 hours a week, and then you get a 5-hour-a-week advisory role at a startup and they want to pay you in equity and cash, so they, get you a 5-hour-a-week H-1B so that you can legally do that advisory work as well. So concurrent H-1Bs exist, 2 H-1Bs at the same time. And here is how this can work, and I'll go into case studies and more details in a minute. But essentially, if somebody needs to get an H-1B without the lottery and has the goal of working at a private company, you first get the person an H-1B without the lottery through a university or through a nonprofit associated with the university. And then once that H-1B is secured and the person is in the United States on H-1B status, then the private company that wants to employ them full-time can file a second concurrent H-1B. And so that's how we've done it for several of our clients. Now, if you feel like looking at primary sources, here is just some context, and I just wanted to mention a few things on here. You know, an institution of higher education, that's basically a college or a university. This concept of a nonprofit affiliated with a university, I think the original intent was that there are auxiliary, I don't know how to pronounce that, hospital nonprofits associated with universities. So there's like Stanford University and Stanford Hospital, and they're two separate entities, but Stanford Hospital still needs doctors and nurses, and they do research. So the government wanted them to be able to get an unlimited number of H-1Bs as well. So they constructed this, you know, part 2 that basically says if a nonprofit is connected to or associated with an institution of higher education through shared ownership or control by the same board, or they're operated by it, or they're attached to it, or they have a formal affiliation agreement, these are things that would make a nonprofit qualify. And I also just want to briefly mention there's, you know, some variations, and this also exists for research nonprofits as well. So now I'm going to direct your attention to some case studies to show 3 different examples of how we have set this up for different clients in different situations. And we've done many of these, so these are just, you know, samples. Okay. So one way, one option to do this is directly through a research institution. So a startup-like organization approached me, but they're, you know, a social benefit type of organization. And it turns out that they have a lot of funding, they have technology, they're rapidly scaling, but technically they are actually a 501c3, and they are doing applied research, and they're looking at how to apply research in the physical world from academia to address certain global issues. So if your organization happens to be a 501c3 that does basic research or applied research, that organization can specifically get somebody a Cap-Exempt H-1B. And if you're hiring a researcher who is already doing full-time or part-time work at some sort of research institution, and they did not go through the lottery to get the H-1B, and now you want to hire them for your early stage startup to, you know, build out new technology that will save the earth. Before that person gives notice to their government research institution or private research institution employer, it might be worth having a conversation with them about whether they could keep working at that employer part-time, scale down their H-1B. Maybe it would need to be amended instead of 40 hours a week to reflect 5 or 10 hours a week. But if they could somehow maintain that affiliation, at least part-time, it would be super easy to add in a second concurrent H-1B for that researcher to join you at your private company for the other 30, 35, 40, whatever hours a week of additional full-time work. So that is one way we have seen this work for candidates. Another sample idea, case study for your perusal, contemplation, is this notion of nonprofits directly related to universities. So many universities have their own foundation. So I already, you know, shared the university hospital administration concept, but sometimes, like in the state of California, many systems, each university has a specific nonprofit that it can use to own real estate, receive grant money, to employ researchers, to engage in specific research projects, hire students and alumni. So I think this is a major opportunity as well. If anybody has their own university affiliations to your alma mater, or perhaps you're leading employment at a university, attending this webinar, there's some different concepts we've fleshed out with universities where a university could use this nonprofit to hire a professor. Let's say the professor wants to create a startup, but they've never gone through the H-1B lottery and they're waiting their turn in line for a green card because they're from China or something. So, this research, this nonprofit affiliated with the university could perhaps hire the professor for one of their research projects that they got a grant to manage, and then sponsor the professor for a Cap-Exempt H-1B, and then the professor could get a second concurrent H-1B with any intellectual property they've created, where they have some sort of licensing agreement with the university, where they would go create a startup and get a second concurrent H-1B, perhaps to be the chief technology officer of this startup. So that's one way to do it in academia. And another concept that I was brainstorming with somebody from a university with their nonprofit is that universities can use this as a tool for alumni engagement. So when students run out of OPT and STEM OPT, it could be a way to help them stay in the United States longer term if they could do part-time work in their field on behalf of the university for the nonprofit. And then this can be a way for them to be in H-1B status until they've gotten chosen in the lottery, of course. But then they can also have a basis to start full-time work at a private employer as well. So now our last case study that I'm super excited always to share, which has been really valuable for individual candidates, highly skilled workers, startup co-founders, people whose presence is really important to the company and they're willing to make an investment in the person and in their future and in retention, as opposed to sending the person to Canada or making the person go back to grad school for some additional degree that they don't really need to try to get curricular practical training, which is risky from an immigration standpoint anyway. There's an organization that I have the highest regard for. It's called Open Avenues, and they are a nonprofit located in Boston, and they've supported several of our clients to get H-1Bs without the lottery any time of year, specifically to work at technology companies. Their model is that they've developed partnerships with several universities across the United States. Through these affiliation agreements, they are fully vetted with USCIS that they are a Cap-exempt employer, and they have a global talent fellowship program. And so basically, from a company perspective, if you have your candidate, you would nominate your candidate as a global talent fellow at Open Avenues. There's a selection process. If your candidate is selected, there would be an itinerary of services and duties that your candidate would have in the nonprofit once their H-1B is approved for the nonprofit. And this could be leading project-based learning for your company's technologies that need to be developed with a group of students at a US university, or leading micro internships for students. So Open Avenues facilitates all of those all of the overhead related to the universities and setting that up, and then they apply for H-1Bs for their global talent fellows, and those are typically for 5-hour-a-week roles. And then as soon as your candidate is inside the United States on H-1B status, we can support your company to file the second concurrent H-1B that they will need to then start working immediately with your company as soon as the government receives the documents. We don't even have to wait for an approval, actually, since they're already in H-1B status. So this has been a super exciting option over the last year or two. I wrote about it in Business Insider with their director, Danielle, and yeah, it's it's really exciting. I think Danielle is even attending our webinar today. So shout out to Danielle. We really appreciate you. You've done an amazing thing. So the last I heard is that some of the roles that Open Avenues is most open to sponsoring include software developer roles, data science, biotech, double E. Historically, they've also been open to roles in mechanical engineering, financial analysis, market research, and operations research analysis. So the green ones, I think, are the ones where they might have the most active openings for people. And you can listen, we'll share the podcast where I interviewed Danielle about the program. You'll see she's a wonderful person who's open to new ideas. So what I typically tell people is, look, if you are not in one of these specific fields, let's look at your resources, because Open Avenues is interested in creating affiliation agreements with more universities. So if you have a professor who mentored you, who you did research for, who would love to have you back, if one of the founders of your startups has strong ties to a specific university, if the manager has a buddy who's a professor in a department somewhere, let's brainstorm how you could potentially approach Open Avenues and say, hello, we would be interested in considering whether Open Avenues might be willing to partner with a new university to be able to provide the Global Talent Fellowship to our particular candidate in this distinct field that we have a need for. So as long as you can find a professor and students who are open to learning from your candidate, then there's at least the opportunity to have a discussion with Open Avenues about whether a collaboration might be possible. And some of my brainstorming with Danielle that I'm super excited about is just expanding this model to other verticals, to specific organizations. They've figured it out and they've done a really amazing job. And so when I hear the needs of people who are my clients or potential clients, different things come to mind. So maybe some of these ideas will spark you because you have a large organization that needs support on this level, and we could chat about developing out this model further for your specific industry vertical or your specific company even. But different ideas I've had are like, well, what if we just did a whole program for all the people who want to become chiropractors because they don't get STEM OPT and they have to leave after a year? Or there's a lot of staffing companies. What if a staffing company built this out? Or what if there was a specific fellowship in marketing, for example? So anyway, this is some of the future looking stuff. So if you're interested in doing this at a larger level, please contact me, and I would love to have those discussions about how we could scale this all to help more people. I don't have much time to go through this, but I'm gonna briefly just zoom out again. So if you heard all of that and it's not gonna work for you, just here's a gentle reminder that there are more normal immigration options that we've always used for decades. I mean, I have full faith in Open Avenues. I've seen it work countless times. But there is this whole panoply of options out there. The O1s for extraordinary ability, we get those for a lot of startup founders. For people from Canada, Mexico, Australia, Chile, and Singapore, there are special types of visas. If your company is doing trade or is owned and invested in by people of a specific country, there might be the E1 or E2. There's J's for people to come do research or get trained for a year and a half or do research for 5 years. So there are many alternatives. L's for people transferring from one branch of a company to another. And just beyond visas, there are also green cards that you can consider. And if you're not born in India or China, or if you are, but you can already apply for EB1 for extraordinary ability or research or multinational manager, You might be in a situation where you just want to apply for a green card, and that could be a multi-year process, but people do get a work permit at a certain stage of the process if they're in the United States. So this is why I love having individual assessments. We have detailed candidate questionnaires. So if you are looking at just figuring out, okay, what strategy is the right one for me or for my client, please contact us. We would love to send you the right questionnaire and help figure out either in a consultation, which is potentially paid, or some other email exchange, but like at least help narrow down the universe of options based on your specific needs, goals, timelines, because as you can tell from this presentation, there are so many variations for people. Many types of green cards. We have lots of resources. We have a class if you want to get ready for an O1, an EB1A, or an EB2 NIW green card. We'll email you this as well. And remember, if you're in love with a US citizen, there's always the marriage route. It's just got to be a good faith marriage, but that can be the shortest, fastest, quickest, cheapest way to a green card. I mean, it comes with other obligations like a marriage, right? So you got to weigh the pros and cons carefully. And citizenship, typically, if you want to become a citizen, you're going to have a green card for at least 5 years, but it's 3 years if you're married to a citizen. So I'm going to leave this slide up here for a minute so that you can connect with us on our socials and get our contact information. If you need help, we'll be happy to give you, assess what the next step is for you. And so I'm going to take a minute to answer some questions here. And then I did see Danielle in the audience. So Danielle, if you feel like sharing a few words about Open Avenues, send me a chat message and I'll see if I can call on you for some audio discussion if you would like. And I'll get to some of these questions in the question and answer panel in the meantime. So the first question we got was, does your bachelor's degree need to be in a related field for computer science, or it doesn't matter? You need to have the typical required education and experience to do the specialty occupation. So if you were going to be a software engineer, you probably need to show, depending on how the lawyers structure it, that you have a bachelor's degree in computer science or electrical engineering or some other sort of computer related field. And if you dropped out of college, then you would need to show, years of coding experience, for example. So there does have to be a connection. So thank you for that question. And now we have another question. What are the implications for the applicant's spouse? For example, can they work? So spousal work authorization is an independent question. I do believe we have a podcast about that and some TechCrunch articles. Essentially, the H-4 work permit is only issued at certain phases, and at the beginning, H-1B spouses on H-4 visas cannot work, but after certain milestones are reached in the green card process, you can work. H-1B spouses, there's about 100,000 in the United States, and many also have advanced degrees. So the Cap-Exempt H-1B can be a great way to work as a spouse without having to wait for an H-4 work permit. So thank you so much for that question. And then we also have, do software product managers also have the same benefits of software developers? I'm not sure what benefits you are referring to, but I would say that it is possible to structure an H-1B for a software product manager. So that is something you can keep in mind as you go forward. So thank you so much for that. And I'm gonna push a button that allows Danielle Goldman to talk. She's the Executive Director of Open Avenues. Thank you so much for being here on the webinar today, Danielle.
Of course, Sophie. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great. In our remaining couple of minutes, would you like to share? I mean, you heard my overview of your organization, but I'm sure you can do a better job than me. Could you
No.
tell us who you would like to help and the best way for them to just assess their eligibility before they get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. You do a great job with the explanation. I'm always blown away.
Thanks.
But yeah, so Open Avenues, as Sophie said, we run the Global Talent Fellowship Program. And when we look at candidates for the program, Sophie shared some of those priority areas where we have active partnerships and demand from our universities for support from our fellows. So our fellows spend 5 hours per week leading experiential learning projects on behalf of their company. So those can be in the form of micro internships. Those are students are paid to work on a project for your company. They can be a classroom project for students to gain industry experience. So when we look for candidates, number one, we look to make sure that they have a strong H-1B case. And number two, we talk to the candidate to see, is this something they're interested in doing for 5 hours per week? Does the individual have any mentor experience or any experience working or managing peers that would make us feel confident that during those 5 hours working with students, that they're getting the most out of that experience and that students are also getting the most out of that experience. So it's a leadership development opportunity for foreign talent. It's also a great way for companies to recruit diverse talent from universities. So
Yeah, to have
it's
that
a little
talent
recap.
pipeline. And
Yeah.
sometimes, Danielle, when I have mentioned the program to people on Zoom, they say, yeah, wink, wink, nod, nod, nudge, nudge. You don't actually have to, teach the students, do you?
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, actually, no, it's very serious. You have to do it. And like, if you've never been a teacher before, don't worry. Like, your staff helps make sure that
Yeah,
you're providing the content in a way that meets developmental and educational like milestones appropriately, but there's very much involvement and engagement,
totally.
right?
Totally. We don't expect fellows to be teachers. It's more like an industry manager. You're managing students who would be like interns at your company. And that's how we try to structure it. And we support all of our fellows with helping to figure out the best strategies and with training and onboarding.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we're so inspired by everything you're doing to help talented people live their dreams and help companies get access to diverse talent populations. So thank you for jumping in here, Danielle. We
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks,
it.
Sophie.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. That concludes our time. So next steps, Edith is going to be emailing you some of our materials. Please let us know if you have any questions or need one of our questionnaires to fill out as a potential candidate. Um, you know how to find us. Edith, anything else in closing, please?
No, I think we're all good.
All right. Well, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much. Be well, do good work, keep in touch.